Alright guys, Bilam here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with what will be the final video for the year of 2024, and in what has become a yearly tradition. For this final video, I'll be doing my annual Year in Reality TV video, a video where I rank every reality show that I've watched that finished over the course of the last year, while also at the end giving a bit of a channel update and talk about what to expect in the upcoming year. But again, the bulk of this video will be this big ranking of all these shows, where last year I ended up going pretty all out and watched somehow 40 reality shows, where this year I decided to hold back a little bit, and despite that still watched 31 reality shows, debatably more as we'll get to. I will give a spoiler warning before we get into the seasons here, as again, I'm not going to refrain from mentioning moments and results of the seasons. So again, I will be including timestamps if you want to skip certain portions of the video, but just be warned that if I'm talking about a season, there's a chance you might get spoiled in some things that end up happening there. But again, through that, we will be ultimately ranking 31 shows. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about some special cases where there are shows that I did watch in its entirety. I didn't feel like they were shows I wanted to include on the proper list. There are shows that I started to watch but did not finish. There are shows that I started but they ultimately did not finish in the year 2024. One of those being a very ridiculous case that we'll get to. While also there being shows that I intended on watching coming into the year, yet just simply did not end up finding the time to do so. So with that, let's talk about the shows that I did not end up getting to watch, which, again, starting it off, I did not end up watching any BBUK this year, where last year I did end up watching the reboot of BBUK, and I did enjoy it for the most part, though this year I just simply did not get into it. I was busy at the time that it started, did not ultimately end up watching it. Same thing goes to Celebrity Big Brother as well, where I simply just didn't find the time to end up watching them. Also did not get around to watching Love Island US this year, in a spot where I actually didn't intend to, largely because of how much the online community seemed to love the season. Despite me not watching the season, I saw so many posts about the season that I feel like I know a decent chunk of the cast. And it's a season that I did intend on watching at a point, but I just simply never got around to it. Also did not end up watching The Challenge Sweden, which is a season that I did intend on watching, where, if you don't know, this is the first ever international challenge season that is not made by the main challenge team, where, again, I was interested in watching it, though obviously through that I would have to find a subtitled version of it, and again, just never end up finding the time to end up ultimately watching it. Now, also I'll mention a show that I actually did start but never finished, and that show is Inside, which, to be fair, is an online show, essentially a YouTube sort of version of Big Brother, kind of. And again, I watched the premiere, and the thing that intrigued me on this season is the fact that Manrika from The Circle was on it. Though ultimately, despite watching the premiere, I just never got back to it. Again, the episodes are pretty lengthy, and while there's not that many of them, I just didn't care that much to end up watching it, especially considering I got spoiled in the result anyway. But with that, now I want to mention shows that did start over the course of 2024, yet somehow did not finish. The first of which being Beast Games, the Mr. Beast reality show that just recently started, where I have watched the first 2 episodes up to this point, and it's fine. Where obviously it's a show that just feels like a grander version of his YouTube videos. Again, feels very inspired by the likes of Squid Game, and really feels like a show that kind of lacks a lot of substance. Again, it's just people doing things, and I don't really care about these people because we haven't really been introduced to any of these people. So while there is some fun from some shock value that there is at points, I do feel like it's a show that kind of just lacks substance. But again, I'll probably ultimately end up watching it and end up probably talking about it next year, as I will these other shows I'm about to talk about. And with that, next show I started but did not finish was Bloody Game Season 3, or Game of Blood, a Korean reality show, and part of the survival genre, again, in line with the likes of The Genius and Devil's Plan and Time Hotel, and again, these other shows I did like for the most part. So again, I decided to give this one a shot, specifically because it had the likes of Jinho and Dongmin from The Genius, which, to be fair, they've been on other seasons of Bloody Game, but also this one had Kyungran from The Genius, which was also intriguing to me, so I was like, screw it, I'll try it. I watched the first 2 episodes, I thought it was fine, again, kind of in line with what I expected from it. The reason I didn't continue watching it is simply because the season's not done yet, and it won't be done until the beginning of next year, so through that, I might as well just wait until the season's done and then binge them all. And again, the season will be in the next Year in Reality TV video, but as of right now, for the first few episodes I've seen, I do think this show does have some potential to be a pretty solid one by the end. And also another show that somehow did not end this year, which is ridiculous, we got The Challenge 40, Battle of the Eras, where how did this not finish this year? Like, this season literally started back in August. And I think the fact that this season's still going on is truly indicative of the negative trajectory the challenge has gone on and really just dragging out their seasons. And again, the finale is going to be like the first week of January, where it is kind of ridiculous that they dragged it out that much. And again, if I really wanted to, obviously I could have put it in the ranking, though to stay genuine to the premise of the video, I won't. And again, I'll put on next year's, but really at the end of the day, Challenge 40, it's fine. Again, I do respect a lot of the things that they did to celebrate the 40 seasons, and I do think there are certain episodes that are pretty strong, but I do think as a whole, the season is just getting really dragged out to where, again, I had a decently high opinion of it through the first half of the season, though I do think the last few episodes in particular before the final here have been such a drag to where it really has lowered my opinion on the season as a whole. But with that, I've got one more set of shows I want to talk about before I get into the actual ranking, and those shows are College Survivor seasons. Again, I've talked about this in the past that technically I could be including these College Survivor seasons on the actual ranking, but I decided not to just because, again, I do feel like it's a bit strange to be ranking these seasons, again, fully put together by students in comparison to these like professional production companies. But again, over the course of this year, I did watch Survivor Maryland Winner Takes All, Season 8 of Survivor Maryland, and actually a pretty good season of the show. One that kind of shocked me considering I haven't loved a lot of the second generation. I do feel like they've been largely lacking. I feel like this is the first one that actually felt in line with the older seasons and was a really fun ride with a kind of controversial ending in my opinion, but a season with, again, some pretty good characters, some really interesting gameplay. Again, probably my favorite College Survivor season of the year. Oh, well, also 2 Survivor Michigan seasons end up airing this year, that being Survivor Michigan, The Michigan Difference, Season 6, the start of Era 2, which was fine. I mean, again, I think this was a season that had some high points. There were some really great episodes along the way. There were also some snoozers as well. Again, it was kind of a mixed bag. I do feel like the editing of the show was not as interesting to me as what we got towards the end of Era 1, where I think that's something that Survivor Michigan really excelled at, is how strong the editing of the show was, where, again, I do feel like the newer College Survivor seasons feel more in line with just your typical College Survivor season, in a spot where, again, I felt like Survivor Michigan typically excelled that. But again, Season 6, I thought was a solid season. Season 7, though, which is actually technically not done at the time of this recording, Survivor Michigan Wolverine Wheel, which I don't love the name, but it is a season that I think is probably better than what it should be, considering the season was filmed during COVID and its entire virtual season. I do feel like there is a lot more intrigue than what I would have expected. I would have expected virtual season to just simply not hit as much. And to be fair, I think it does obviously limit aspects of the game that we typically see in College Survivor. But again, I think the season's actually turning out to be decent, even though, again, I do think we are getting some slower episodes here and there. But a season that I think as a whole is still, again, perfectly fine. But with that, we're now on to the actual ranking. We have 31 reality shows to rank here. And with that, let's start off at number 31, the worst season of reality TV I finished from the year 2024 ends up being The Amazing Race, Australia, Celebrity Edition, Season 2. What a mouthful. And also, what a boring season. I do think this is a season that really just did not do much for me. Again, coming after Season 1 of Celebrity Edition, which I thought was actually a really strong season, probably the best Amazing Race season I've watched in years at this point, to come from that into this season where, again, I just didn't think it really hit. Where outside the appearance of Cyrell, who I did think brought some entertainment at points, I just felt like this cast was just largely bland. And I literally could not recount a single notable moment from the show at this point. Now, again, there were some shocking eliminations along the way, but again, the path that we went on to get there was just simply just not that interesting to me. I just found this season to be so boring throughout the entirety of it, and because that's here at number 31. Now, number 30, we're keeping The Amazing Race. We got the only US season from this year, The Amazing Race 36. And I think Amazing Race 36 is probably going to go down as one of the worst Amazing Race seasons. It's just another season that just felt so boring for the majority of it. Where obviously a lot of the season is really just dominated by Ricky and Cesar, both in terms of screen time, where I feel like we just got so much of them on the show, but also in the fact that they obviously just dominate the race. I probably have the most dominant performance in the history of the show. And through that, while they are a purely affable team, again, they were not the most riveting TV. And also it just feels like a downgrade from 35, where obviously this was filmed as 35, but aired as 36. And again, it went back to having the COVID restrictions and also had 90-minute episodes, which again was brutal as well. And again, we know that production themselves did not want 90-minute episodes for this season. They actually, again, that's why they went out of their way to air it in different orders to avoid this season having 90-minute episodes, only be forced to do it anyway. And again, I think you can very much tell. I do think this is a season that just felt so dragged out with very little to show for it. And again, because of that, for me, it's here number 30. Now, number 29, and I think this was a bit of a tough debate for me between 29 and 28. I think these are both pretty lacking seasons of reality TV, both of which have semblances of intrigue there, but don't really live up to the promise that these shows potentially had. And while I actually think 28 is probably the more flawed season, 29 is a season that I just felt nothing about. And that season is The Summit US, where straight up, I should mention also the fact that I did actually intend on watching the Summit AU, considering I know that it had Matt Rogers on it. Yeah, I just never got around to it. And a lot of the reason why is because I did not like the Summit US. And again, I found this show to be one that had potential, because at the end of the day, this is actually a social strategy game. There are vote-offs. There is, again, a jury vote system at the end, to where, again, as a game, it could be looked at similarly to the likes of Survivor and Big Brother. The problem is that they don't fully commit to that concept, where instead they really commit more so to the climbing to the summit aspect of the show, where, again, this is essentially a social strategy game that is played as they are climbing to the summit of a mountain. And through that, we get so much more focus on the actual climb, which is just not as interesting to me. Where, again, I think if this show went all in on the social strategy aspects of the show, I think this show would be higher on the list. But I think because it didn't, just so much of the middle portions of this season just felt like such a blur to me. And that's despite the fact that, again, I do think the first couple episodes were pretty strong. I think episode 2 in particular has that ridiculous moment where they pretend like they killed somebody, which is really humorous. And again, I thought the finale was actually pretty strong, and the pseudo final tribal was, again, actually kind of interesting. But again, I do think the show is just kind of lacking and not really committing to what the game of this show actually is, and instead just focusing on people climbing up a mountain, which is, again, the Aussie aesthetic of the show, but just what was not nearly as interesting to me. So again, end up ranking this at number 29. Number 28, again, a show that I think is deeply flawed. I don't think this is a good show of reality television, but is a show that, again, I at least enjoyed watching more. And that show is The Trust, A Game of Greed, a Netflix show that aired at the very beginning of this year. And I almost forgot this even came out this year. But The Trust is a show that, again, I think was mostly bad by the end, largely because of its format. I think its format is just fundamentally bad. It's a format that incentivizes you to not backstab each other. Or again, you have to have trust in your fellow players to keep the prize pot. And again, the show culminates in that happening, to where, again, it's a show that really just incentivizes you to not do anything. And again, I think that is a massive flaw as a format. The reason this is higher than the Summit for me, though, is because I thought the television product was fine enough, where, again, I actually did like a decent amount of this cast. I like Tolu, I like Julie. I thought there were some people that were, again, trying to play the game a bit harder than what they should have, considering the fact that this is, again, a show that incentivizes you to do nothing. Where, again, I think for me, I at least have more of a lasting impact with The Trust than I did with The Summit. For a while, I think The Summit is probably technically the better season. I think The Trust is a season that sticks out to me a little bit more. That's why it's here at number 28. Now 27, and now we're moving on to another season that I kind of forgot happened this year, but this is one of the few non-English language shows I watched across this year. I do have The Traitors Quebec, and the first Traitors season we're going to be talking about, where all the other ones will be much higher on the list. But again, Traitors Quebec here, I thought was a fine experience. I mean, this is a season that was filmed back-to-back with The Traitors Canada Season 1, and I think you can very much tell, I mean, this just felt like a repeat of the Traitors Canada in most aspects. Obviously, different cast, and obviously not in English, but outside of that, format-wise, it was fairly similar, and obviously, there's always going to be this, like, border of entry, and the fact that, obviously, this is a subtitled show. I have to watch subtitles the entire time instead of, like, being able to naturally understand what is going on, and through that, and there is, obviously, some bias there in ranking a show like Traitors Quebec lower, though at the same time, obviously, again, The Genius is one of my favorite reality shows ever. But again, Traitors Quebec ended up being a show that had some fun characters. I think Miriam in particular ended up being probably one of the best reality TV characters of the year. The problem is that I feel like the rest of the cast was just kind of fine. I mean, we did have one of the traitors like lying about having a sick daughter, which I thought was also an interesting storyline. Really outside that, I think the season plays out in pretty much the worst way possible. Again, all the traitors end up being caught. Final roundtable is literally just all faithfuls, and they end up sharing, and we end up getting them share the money. And again, it's just not an interesting result. And considering also that border to entry as well, I did not love my experience with The Traitors Quebec. This probably being the worst Traitor season that I've watched up to this point, even though, again, it's not inherently bad. I just think it was largely lacking based on what I expected coming into it. And because of that, for me, it's here number 27. Now number 26. We're keeping with shows from Quebec. We got Survivor Quebec Season 2, which, I'll be honest, I do have a tough time wrapping my head around this season, where I do think the highs of this season are higher than a lot of the seasons we're about to be talking about. And again, I think you could still claim that, again, disconnect and the fact that this is obviously a subtitled show and it makes it tougher to truly connect to this season. But I do think Survivor Quebec, just, again, the biggest issue of the show is its format. It's, again, a show that's formatted terribly, where it's a show that's on 5 times a week, one episode being a full round of gameplay, the other 4 combined end up being a full round of gameplay. And through that, again, it just ends up leading to the presentation of the season feeling very dragged out, and also feeling like them throwing things in just simply for the fact of filling out content for these, like, like 4 episode stretches where, again, I think the formatting of the season is terrible. Now, again, in terms of how the season plays out, there is some intrigue. There are some interesting points of the season. We get a rock draw, probably the most boring rock draw that could possibly ever exist. But again, we get a rock draw. That's interesting. And again, there are some fun characters here and there. I think we get a pretty decent winner. But I do think the overall presentation of the season is something that really ends up leaving it behind. Where while there were some fun moments here and there, I do feel like my overall experience watching the season was not particularly great. So again, because that for me, it's here number 26. Now number 25. We're jumping into a couple Netflix seasons in a row here. This one being a season that I'm just kind of mixed on. And that show is Perfect Match Season 2, where Perfect Match is a weird show in the fact that, again, it's obviously a Netflix ripoff of Love Island, again, getting all these alumni from Netflix reality shows and putting them in a villa and trying to get them to hook up. And again, it's the type of show that I typically would not care about, though obviously I watched season 1 because, again, I knew a good chunk of the cast. And I was like, and again, in a spot where, again, I was trying to watch 40 reality shows, I was like, screw it, I'll try watching this show. Let's see how it goes. Again, I actually enjoyed myself throughout that first season. Season 2 was a spot here where I did not know a majority of this cast. I think literally I knew like less than a handful of people here. I did think that obviously, again, affected my opinion of the season. On the fact that this cast just seemed a lot less likable. I feel like this is a season that just very much came off very toxic and had some seemingly terrible people take a lot of the forefront of the show. Obviously, Harry being a massive example of that. But that ends up harming my opinion of it. Also, again, I still think the overall format of the show is really terrible. And this like jury vote at the end, though, again, no one's like really taking the jury vote seriously. And we ended the season with a couple that wasn't even together for the majority of the game and it winning by the end simply because the players out of the game made a pact to reward them, considering they were also out of the game for the longest amount of time, which is also really dumb. Where again, Perfect Match again, which is kind of a joke for season 2, where again there was some negativity, there was also some dumb aspects of this format. Where I didn't like as much as season 1, but I didn't outright hate it either. So again, I guess because that's here number 25. Now 24, another season of a show that I feel like there were decent moments. I did like a good chunk of this cast. Yeah, it's still a format that I don't love, and that is The Mole Netflix season 2, where again I just don't click with the format of The Mole. And again, I know some people say that The Mole is like one of the greatest games, but again, I don't really see it. Again, for me, I just think it's just dumb, the aspect of everyone has to do a quiz about the mole and that determines who gets eliminated. Sure, I get the aspect of it's a show that incentivizes you to pretend like you're the mole and can cause chaos through, again, just everyone being incentivized to play chaotically. But despite that, we don't get that much drama on this season. Like, obviously, we do get the stuff around Hannah and Tony, to where I thought they were really interesting characters and brought a lot of conflict to the show. Obviously, Muna was on this season, who I had known from Sequester, and again, it was cool to see her here. Now, I did think we ended up getting a pretty lackluster mole on this season, which again, part of the thing that ends up harming the season as a whole for me. And really, I just feel like by the end of it, I just felt like season 1 just felt more fun. And again, to be fair, I had not watched a mole season since I was a kid, and even then don't even remember those seasons. So again, it felt fresh at the time, though. Watching season 2, it just really did not do much for me. And because of that, for me, it's here number 24. 23, moving on to a reality show from pretty early on in the year, one that was, again, just another like fine season of reality television. That season is The GOAT, a show that gets alumni from all these other reality shows and puts them together into what is essentially a parody of a reality show, which again, it feels like we're getting, which again, I would have said it's a ripoff of House of Villains if it wasn't for the fact that this was filmed before House of Villains even came out. But again, I was attracted to the show simply because there were some people I knew. Obviously, Dave Vaughn was on the show. That's cool. Wendell was on this show. I thought I had a somewhat interesting cast. And again, watching the show, it turned out to be fine and didn't have these like big moments that really will stand the test of time. Though I think it was a purely passable show. The one that, again, just felt very cheap and just being these reality TV alumni just staying at a mansion for probably a few weeks while playing these really low budget games, and again constantly having jokes being said by Daniel Tosh, who was hosting the show, to where again, it just felt like kind of a less focused version of House of Villains, where again House of Villains obviously is focused around villains. This show is just random generic reality TV people, and at the end of the day, again, it was fine. I have it here at number 23. And now number 22, we're moving on to the best Amazing Race season on the list, again, already. And it's shockingly The Amazing Race Canada, season 10, where I can't believe The Amazing Race Canada had the best season of Amazing Race this year. And to be fair, it wasn't tough to get that, but still, I thought this was actually a competent season of Amazing Race Canada. Again, Amazing Race Canada is a show that I think has been on a downward slump for the last few seasons. Again, I think seasons 8 and 9 have both been pretty bad. Season 9 is probably one of the most boring seasons of Amazing Race just in general, and I think season 10 here, again, felt like a step above that. And I think a major reason for that is, again, the inclusion of Kevin Martin, obviously from BB Can and Traders, and he was there for Gurleen. And again, I thought they were great villains on this season, bring a lot of conflict to the show, where, again, I think they played very sloppily. But again, I think they brought something that Amazing Race Canada has really lacked in recent seasons, of having this like villainous figure to, again, just add more drama to the show. And outside that, I felt like this was a fine cast. Though realistically, I feel like outside the inclusion of Kevin and Gurleen, I feel like the rest of the cast was, again, pretty in line with recent seasons. I did feel like I enjoyed watching the season through and through a lot more and more recent seasons of Amazing Race, which is why it's here at number 22. Now, number 21, we're finally moving on to the first challenge season of the year, in a year that we actually did not end up finishing many challenge seasons, and again, the other one's not that far away either. But either way, at 21, I do have a season I actually talked about last year, and that being the Challenge Battle for New Champion, which I still can't believe what a stupid name this season has. But by the end of it, I thought the Battle for a New Champion is just an extremely mixed season of the show. It's a season that I actually thought had some pretty high highs, some of the highest highs in recent challenge. I thought the beginning of the season was pretty drama filled, and again, it felt like a breath of fresh air, these smaller names really making names for themselves. And I feel like the back portion of the season was really great. And again, the entire situation around like Nerissa and Olivia, also like Jay becoming this massive villain, I feel like there's a lot of great stuff towards the end of the season. The problem is the middle is such a drag, and again, I just think the format of this season really ends up failing it. Like the entire concept that people could potentially not go home if they beat the champions, it's just so lame. And again, we had this like really long stretch where no one was going home, and I just feel like it's just such terrible TV. And again, it just really made the show very monotonous for a pretty lengthy period of the season. And then mixing that, the fact that I think the result of the season is also very lacking, to where, again, very disappointing to see Emmanuel, probably the most boring and unlikable presence on the show, end up winning the show. Where, again, I just think at the end of the day, it's a season that, again, has these high highs. Again, the entire arc of Nerissa across the season is probably one of the best, like, single season runs for a competitor in recent years. Yeah, there's just so many low points across the rest of the season that, for me, ends up landing here at number 21. Now, number 20, we're moving on to a season that I can't believe is actually this high, in the sense that, and I've talked about this show every year. It's one I always debate whether or not it should even be on the list, but every year I do have it like towards the bottom of the list, and that yet now it's, again, like kind of nearing the middle of the list, and that show is American Ninja Warrior 16, where A&W 16 actually ended up being a pretty decent season of A&W. Shockingly, considering the format was exactly the same as A&W 15, and A&W 15 was pretty bad for the most part. Yeah, A&W 16 I feel like was an improvement every single way. I think the editing of the show got a lot better. I think the actual runs themselves were a lot more interesting, especially once we get to Vegas, where I think this is probably one of the best Vegases in the entire show's history. It was getting some really great results really throughout. And again, with Vance Walker winning, becoming the first two-time champion of A&W, and having a pretty spotless season this time around. Again, I think it really makes this season, again, a pretty good one from A&W standards. I think despite, again, there being a lot of signs that would be bad, it ends up being much better than I ever would have expected. For proportionally, this is the highest I've had an A&W season rank in all the years I've been doing this, even though, again, that's still only here number 20. And number 19, we're moving on to a show that I do struggle with where to land this show, where I just feel like it's a show that I know a lot of other people like a lot more than I do. To where, again, I wish I liked this show as much as most people, but I just simply don't. And that show is House of Villains Season 2. Now, again, I know people like House of Villains way more than I do. Again, in my last ranking, House of Villains is actually proportionally higher on the list. Though the reality is, like, House of Villains Season 2 here is essentially the same. I feel like I have pretty much the exact same thoughts on this season than last season. And the fact that it is, again, a show that is obviously, again, has these aspects of it being a parody of reality TV. Also, again, bringing in all these alumni from other shows. And again, having these villainous figures. It ultimately ends up putting together a pretty strong cast here. Again, the return of Tiffany Pollard. We get Wes. We get Jesse Goddard from Big Brother. Richard Hatch was there. Again, even for people I didn't know, again, Candy Muse was really fun TV. Victoria was really good TV. Again, I thought this is a pretty solid cast. The problem I have with the show, and again, it's still the same problem I have with season 1, is that it feels so disingenuous. It just really does not feel real. Where, again, for a reality TV show, it does feel just really inauthentic. It feels like a lot of people just hamming up a character for the sake of living up to their reputations as these villains. Where, again, I would not be shocked if the show is scripted, where it just feels like it. Where, again, I know people on like Twitter were hyping up the like Jesse Wes rivalry and them getting into a shouting match. Yet to me, that just felt so fake. fake. It just felt like Jesse playing into his like wrestler character, while again Wes felt like he was acting as well. Where again, I just don't feel like the show is real, and I feel like that has always impacted my enjoyment while watching the show. Where again, while like on paper, it's probably a more fun season of reality TV for sure than again the next few seasons we'll be talking about. It's just a show that again I struggle to really click with just because of how fake it feels, and because of that for me it's here 19. Now number 18, we're moving on to a show that I think has a lot of promise. I think there was a lot of potential in this show that just simply did not live up to it by the end, but I do think if this is a show to continue, I could see this being a show that could improve over time, though to be fair, I don't know how likely it is that we're getting more of the show, but that show is The Anonymous. And The Anonymous is a show that, again, I was attracted to by the fact that Xavier from Big Brother was on it. Also Nina Twine from Australian Survivor, and also Sandra's daughter was on it. And through that, I was really interested in seeing what the show would have to offer, and it turned out to be surprisingly good. It's kind of a show that kind of mixes in aspects of like The Traitors and The Circle, and comes up with a really interesting format in the sense that you are living in a house and spending time with these people and could strategize in person, but the way the actual bulk of the game is played is through an avatar, which you also have an anonymous chat in, and with the goal there being to keep your identity secret, and the one that does so the best ends up getting the sole vote to evict. And again, it's this really interesting social strategy game that, again, I think has so much potential. I think the problem is that I do think the season kind of lost steam after a while. I think the first half of the season was, again, really interesting, though I started to not care towards the back portion of the season, along with the fact that I think the format of the show is just terrible. The fact that they ended every episode on this big cliffhanger of who gets eliminated just leaves it so you just don't care what's happening by the time of next week, where I think this is a show that is purely meant to be binge, yet was instead released in a weekly schedule, which again just simply did not work for entertainment value, to where again I think it is a show that had they just fixed the aspect of the format, I probably would have enjoyed my overall experience with it a lot more. But even as is, again, I thought it was a fun show. It is a show that again has some really interesting results as well, though I thought it was a pretty fun show by the end of it, just one that has again a few kinks to work out, though sadly I don't expect it to be renewed, but again still solid show. It's here number 18. Now number 17, we're moving on to again one of the shows I just mentioned, the show that I think inspired aspects of The Anonymous, and that show is The Circle. Well, this year we got 2 seasons of The Circle. Here I'm going to be talking about season 6, the first of the seasons that aired this year, which I thought was a solid season. Again, I think The Circle this year has seemingly found its stride. Sadly, at a point where I think most people have given up on The Circle, and you don't really hear much excitement over The Circle at this point. And again, it's the point where I stopped covering the show myself. Yet, sadly, then being at a point where we got 2 really strong seasons this year, and season 6 here again was a pretty solid one. Now, I will be honest, I kind of forgot a lot about what happened, to the point where right before making this video, I did go back and look at who was on this cast and the big moments, and it reminded me just how good this season was at the time. Yeah, I do think that is obviously a flaw I have to mention here. The fact that this didn't have that lasting impact on me to where I actually remembered what happened on this season. But again, it's a season that I thought still had a really fun cast, a very strategic cast, probably one of the most game-savvy casts of The Circle. On the fact we had like Jordan as a late entrant who brought a lot of drama to the show. Again, QT, someone I really liked on this season. We also had the entire gimmick of AI at the beginning of the season, which I thought was an interesting premise, though they get rid of it a bit too soon. But still, I think there was a lot to like from this season. I think this season was a fun ride. Yeah, again, the fact that I just did not actually remember a good chunk of it by the time I made this video is something I did knock against it. So again, it's here number 17. Now, number 16, moving on to what ends up being the top challenge season of the year, even though it's not even that great of a challenge season, but it's the Challenge All-Stars 4, a season that I thought had so much potential. I was so excited for this season coming into it after, again, waiting so long, and again, knowing the results. It was a really interesting season results-wise. Yet, in terms of how it plays out in the show, it was okay. I thought it was fine. Again, I thought it ended up being a pretty baseline season. Again, still better than any of the more modern mainline seasons, but still a season that, again, I don't think was as good as, again, like All-Stars 2. Despite the fact that we had this, again, really great Kara-Laurel dynamic across the season, and even the Kara-Cam rivalry, and really just in general, Kara's run on this season was really fun to watch. Also, again, I really like Steve's run in the season. Ace was a really humorous character. It was cool to see the return of Rachel Robinson on this cast. So I thought there was a lot to like on this season, but again, we do know that there was, again, a lot of drama that was edited out of the show that would have been nice if it was actually included. And really just, again, at the end of the day, ends up being a pretty average season of the challenge, which, again, is enough to put it here at number 16. Now, number 15, moving on to a show that we got season 2 of this year in a spot where season 1 was last year. And I actually really liked the show last year. Yeah, I feel like season 2 felt better and worse in different ways, but enough to have me have a pretty similar opinion of it. And that show is Outlast Season 2, where Outlast is obviously a show that is, again, a purely survival-based show. Again, you have the cast being broken up into teams of 4, and they have to survive the longest on an island. Again, you can also interact with the other teams, potentially switch teams. Again, I think there's a lot of interesting social aspects to this game, and I think we see it play out pretty well on this season, in the fact that we see people betraying their teams left and right, people making some interesting moves. Well, I don't think the season has really the high that Season 1 had, where, again, you had the entire, heist sequence, which I feel like was probably one of the best moments of reality TV, especially outside of the Survivor Big Brother sphere from last year. Well, this year, again, doesn't really have a moment like that. Yeah, again, I still really like the story of Bree and the story of Joey. I think Emily's downfall was really interesting. And again, I think just as a whole, I just found this season to be a mostly consistent one. I largely enjoyed for the majority of it, and that's why it's here at number 15. Number 14. Moving on to another show that had Season 1 last year, Season 2 this year, but a show that I thought had a pretty big improvement from Season 1. That show being Physical 100 Season 2, where, again, Physical 100 is a show that, again, would have been my dream show when I was a kid. Again, a show where we have 100 people doing these really physical challenges to narrow it down to one by the very end. Again, I think a really intriguing premise that, while I enjoyed Season 1, I did think it was a bit flawed there. I did think the overall pacing of the show was a bit off. I did feel like a lot of the cast did not really gel with me, especially by the end, where, again, I think it was a weirdly edited show where the people that made it to the final round of the game were people that I had no clue who these people were, which is always an issue with, again, these shows that have these larger casts. But again, you would think that you would focus in on the people that make it deep into the game. Yeah, again, Physical 100 Season 1 is a show that simply didn't do that. While I feel like the storytelling in Season 2 was just so much better, where I feel like you got to know pretty much everybody that made it deep into the game. Also, just in general, I felt like the pacing was a lot better. I feel like a lot more of the cast just stands out, and I just felt like it was overall a more consistent season, to where, again, I really enjoyed myself watching Season 2, and again, feeling like a massive improvement upon its first season, which is why it's here number 14. Now, number 13, moving on to probably one of the biggest surprises of the year. Again, one of the few just kind of random reality shows I end up watching, things I didn't really have much incentive to watch beforehand. Or again, if you can't tell by the list so far, a lot of the shows that I did end up watching this year were shows that, again, I either had watched previous seasons and just watched the newest season this year, or were shows that had alumni from other shows that I cared about that made me incentivized to watch it. This is one of the few that, again, did not have that. And I think really actually the top season on this list in that ballpark. And that show is The Influencer, a Netflix show that I was really surprised at how good it ended up being. To where, again, I heard about this show, and to be fair, part of the reason I ended up watching the show is because I looked at the cast of Bloody Game and saw that some people on that season were on The Influencer, which, again, was on Netflix. So I was like, screw it, let's try out an episode, see how it goes. And I thought it was a surprisingly really fun show. So again, it's a show that, again, like Physical 100 or again, any of these Squid Game influence shows at this point, again, has a massive cast of all these social media influencers. And again, it's essentially Physical 100 for who is the best influencer. Instead of testing out physical strength, this is a show that tests, again, how good of an influencer you are. Again, you're able to get other people to like or dislike you. You having to get the biggest live streaming audience. You having to take photos that are going to grab people's attention. Again, it ends up testing a lot of these skills I thought was really interesting to see. So considering this is also a relatively short series, again, I just had a really fun ride with this. I literally binged the entire series in one day, and again, I thought it was a lot of fun. Now, I did think the final was not as interesting of TV as I would have wanted it to be, but again, really just as a whole, I thought this was a surprisingly really solid season of reality TV. Again, for me, being a step above the likes of Physical 100. Again, I think being probably paced better at least, and being a game that actually had a lot of strategy revolving around it, I thought was interesting to watch. So again, because of that, for me, this is here number 13. Now number 12, we're moving on to first season of a new reality show, one that, again, we're getting another one very soon, but a show that I think has a lot of potential despite the fact that I was not expecting much out of it, and that show is Deal or No Deal Island, where obviously, again, the attraction to this show was the fact that Boston Rob was on the season. Again, that's what really incentivized me to watch the show, but along with that, again, we had the likes of Kim Matina, who's someone that I knew from Sequester, who's on this season, and then just in general, I thought this ended up being a pretty good season. Again, a reality show based around Deal or No Deal is something that, again, should not work. Yeah, I feel like it did, and while obviously there's a lot of luck involved in the Deal or No Deal aspects of the show, I think it actually adds this interesting dynamic where, again, it is essentially a format not that dissimilar here from the likes of The Challenge. The fact that obviously you have people being voted into elimination, aka a game of Deal or No Deal. But I do think the aspect of you have to worry about the person in Deal or No Deal, if they win, they have to drag somebody. I think that's an interesting aspect of the game. And I think the game plays out in a really interesting way. Again, the fact that Boston Rob ends up playing from the bottom for the majority of this season and makes it very deep into the season, again, I think was pretty interesting to see here. Along the fact that, again, I thought there were some other great characters along the way. Again, Stephanie was a pretty massive villain that was really fun to watch. Aaron was also a really likable presence across the season. And again, I thought this was a pretty good season. And it's a season that, again, makes me really excited to see what happens to the show beyond this. Obviously, you know, season 2 is coming up with, again, more really interesting alumni. Again, if you were to tell me that a reality TV show based on Deal or No Deal would actually be probably one of my more anticipated shows of this upcoming year, I think it would have been insane. And I think this season, again, set the precedent for that, to where, again, I think it is a solid season of reality TV that, again, hopefully gets better over time. But again, for season 1 here, I do have it here, number 12, not number 11. And with number 11 here, we're essentially now starting the top tier of the list, aka the shows that, again, you would expect to be towards the top of my list. Again, obviously, a lot of Survivor, Big Brother, Traitors, again, the bigger shows that you would expect from this channel. And with that, we're going to start off with a few Traitors seasons here. At number 11, essentially the worst of the, again, bigger Traitors seasons across the year, ends up being the Traitors US Season 2. And this is a bit of a debate for me, where really this and the next season we'll be talking about, again, I think are very, very close. Yeah, I feel like US Season 2 is a season that has kind of soured on me over time, to where, again, I really liked it at the time, especially the first half of the season. And I think that's the thing, is that the first half of the season is still a really fun ride. Again, seeing all these reality TV people that, again, I've been watching for years. Again, the likes of Dan Gheesling, Janelle, Sandra, Parvati, all on a season together, really insane. And seeing Dan and Parvati as traitors together was also insane. But I think a major problem of this season is that, again, just once Dan and Parvati are caught as traitors, it really just ends up being them led to the slaughter. And once they're gone, I just did not find the cast nearly as interesting anymore. Now, again, I think we still got an interesting result. Again, a Trishelle CT win was probably one of the better case scenarios by the end game. And also, again, I was very surprised to see like someone like Peter Weber be a surprisingly effective player at points. But again, I do think it's a season that kind of drags by the end, where while we do get some pretty good moments, specifically, again, the Janelle-Sandra fight is still something that lingers in my mind. It's a season that I just don't think is consistent enough to be higher on the list here, and that's why it's here at number 11. At number 10, moving on to another Traitor season, probably going to be an unpopular opinion here, where I hear a lot of people say this is the best season of the Traitors ever, and if not the best, then second best. Yeah, I don't get that, and I literally rewatched this season right before making this video to make sure I still held this opinion of it, and I do. And that season is the Traitors UK Season 2. And I do think as a whole, I just don't like the Traitors UK as a series as much as most people. Now, with that said, I do really like Season 1, and I do think Season 1 is still one of the best Traitors seasons out there. Yet, I just think something about the vibe of Traitors UK just doesn't really gel with me. I don't particularly like Claudia, the host, which is, again, I think a pretty unpopular opinion where I see a lot of people rank her as the best host. I think she's my least favorite, actually. I don't like how friendly she is with the cast. I do feel like she just feels like a very not traitory host. But again, as pertains to the actual season 2 here, again, I think it's a solid season. Again, I do think on the rewatch, I did like it more than I did my initial watch through. So again, that's the reason why it's above US 2 at this point, where again, initially I had it below, actually. Yeah, again, I do think on the rewatch, it's a more consistent season than I remembered. I do think Harry and his gameplay across the season is really interesting to see, with also us getting this really great conclusion to the season. But I do think also there's still a good chunk of this cast I really don't care about. So I really do feel like outside of the likes of Harry and Jazz and Paul, really just the cast as a whole just never really gelled with me. A lot of them just feel very samey. Here, again, just like different versions of characters you saw from season 1 or even within themselves. I feel like there were certain people that just kind of blended together. But again, I still think by the end of it, it's a solid season of reality television. I think it has a really strong run from Harry here that really ends up making this season notable by the end. But I do think it's still a season that, in comparison to my top of the top seasons across the year, I think it doesn't quite hit the high highs that those seasons had, and because of that, for me, I have it here number 10. Now, number 9, we're transitioning off of the Traitors here onto, really, I mean, back to back here, the last non-Survivor Big Brother or Traitor seasons on the list. But at number 9, we're going to be starting that off with Claim to Fame Season 3, where, again, I'm shocked that Claim to Fame has still remained this good, where, again, this is obviously the third season of the show. And every year I've had it towards the top of my list. And really just in general, Claim to Fame is a show that I never expected to be this good. I feel like it's a show that feels like a very weird concept of having these relatives to celebrities and have the entire goal of the game being to hide which celebrity you're related to. Yeah, again, I feel like season 3 once again ends up being a strong season here, again with some really strong characters. I mean, Adam being the winner of this season after getting such a dodo edit across the entirety of it, again, was such a fun result here. Beyond that, likes of like HUD and Mackenzie I thought were really interesting players. Miguel was a really fun character, really chaotic player throughout all of it. Naomi was also a really interesting player. I think if I were to give a major criticism to this season, it would be the fact that it's too short. Again, this is a season that had a shorter episode count than the other two seasons. And I think you can kind of tell. I do feel like this season feels a little bit rushed at points. Yeah, despite that, I thought it was a really fun season through and through. A really fun cast and still keeping in line with the last couple seasons. With, again, this probably being one of the most consistent shows in recent years, which is pretty mind-blowing to me. But again, because of that, for me, it's here number 9. And now number 8, moving on to, again, the last non-Survivor Big Brother or Traitor show on the list, but one that I have talked about already on this list. At number 8, I do have The Circle Season 7, which is shocking to me. The Circle had a season this good in the year 2024, and the fact that, again, I think this is up there. I think this is up there amongst the best Circle seasons of all time. I think The Circle season 7 here was shockingly good. Now, again, I think at the end of the day, I think UK season 1 will always be my favorite. I think it's one that lives up to the concept of the show the best. Yeah, I think if we're taking that away, I think this could be argued to be the new best season. Again, I think this had a really fun cast, a lot of really hectic gameplay, mind you, mostly bad gameplay, but still really fun to watch. And again, a cast that really brought a lot of drama. We got a lot of villainous characters across this season, where again, Kevin was such a massive character. Madeline was a massive character. Deb was a really fun presence, especially with her essentially being the Circle's version of Angela. And we had a really fun downfall for like Darian. I thought Andy was a really likable presence. And I thought the winners of the season in Gianna, again, the twins, were again really fun characters in themselves. And again, with like Madeline playing in a really cutthroat way, Kevin making, again, so many dumb decisions across the season. I thought this was such a fun ride. A season that was so much better than it had any right to be. So again, I'm shocked I have a Circle season here in my top 10, especially out of like, again, 30 plus shows, where again, somehow the Circle ends up landing here at number 8. Now number 7, and we're moving back to the Traitors, where shockingly the top 2 Traitor seasons of this year end up coming from 2 of the more lower profile series, again, both of which being pretty top tier seasons of the show. But here at number 7, I do have the Traitors New Zealand season 2, where again, the Traitors New Zealand, despite sadly being canceled now, again, was actually a pretty strong series of the show. Again, I thought season 1 was a pretty consistent season through and through and was towards the top of my list last year. Season 2 here was even better, where I think something unique about the Traitors New Zealand is that it's a series where it feels very clear that people on this cast have watched the other versions of the show. So again, it feels like the overall level of gameplay on Traitors New Zealand is seemingly higher than on most other casts. Now again, not saying that everyone here plays that well. I think we at least get a lot more aggressive play. Where again, we get someone like Mike playing very aggressively from the very beginning. Yet Mark, who probably has one of the most notable moments of the entire season of him turning down an offer to be a traitor, sacrifice himself in the game to essentially screw over the traitors and give more power to the faithfuls, which was interesting to see. Again, I thought Utah was a really interesting player across this season. Noel had an interesting arc. Ciale was, again, a pretty good character through the back half of the season. Jason surprised me at the very end. And again, the winner in Bailey, I thought had a really interesting trajectory throughout this season, to where, again, I think this ends up being, again, one of the more interesting seasons of the show from a gameplay perspective, especially because I feel like we got to see a lot more of the gameplay on this season. To where for me, again, it was close between this and the next season we'll be talking about. I think there is an argument for which one's better, though I do think the next season we'll be talking about is one that's probably going to stick with me a bit longer, even though I think this actually might be the better season, especially in terms of the storytelling. Yeah, again, I do think at the end of the day, the other season had a bit more of an impact on me, which is why this is here number 7, not number 6. The final Traitor season of the year, the best season of the Traitors across this year, ends up being the Traitors Canada season 2. And the reason why? Neda Kalantar finally won a reality show. And again, not to really dumb down the other good aspects of the season, but that is straight up why I have this above Traitors NZ. Because I do think this is a season that is going to stick to my mind a lot longer, because this is the season that Neda finally won something. And again, it is similar to my opinions of the Traitors US season 1, the fact that obviously Suri finally won there, though, and having recently rewatched Traitors season 1, I not think it really held up on the rewatch. Well, I feel like this season probably will hold up a lot more because I think there's a lot more intrigue here. Again, I think this was a season where, again, the Faithfuls were just so bad and so actively bad to where, again, they were just so openly accusing all the wrong people. And that made that aspect of the season really strong. But even within the traitors themselves, we got a lot of conflict. Obviously, Michael John is an incredible character, one of the best characters of the year. Kira was also a very solid player and also had a lot of fun moments. And while, again, Netta wasn't the most dynamic personality on this season, again, I don't care because I like Netta and she finally won a show. So I'm happy that finally happened as well. Where, again, I think on paper, Traitors NZ probably is better. I think it's probably a more consistent ride. I think it probably has more interesting gameplay, especially considering, again, I think a major issue that I have with how the season was presented is that I don't feel like we really get to see much of how Netta necessarily does these things. I don't feel like we got as much focus on, like, Netta's relationship with Trana, which was supposedly super important. But again, who cares? Netta won a reality show, and that's good enough to put it here at number 6. Now, number 5, and again, if you can't tell, top 5 here, it's all Big Brother and Survivor. Again, as you would kind of expect from me, though the question was the order, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but at number 5, I am going to go with Survivor 47, the most recent season of Survivor, and the most recent season of Survivor US, and one that I thought was largely fine. Now, again, fine for Survivor US is still better than most other reality shows. Again, Survivor US, I think, is the best reality show still out there, despite the fact that people obviously criticize the new era. And again, I have that fair share of criticisms myself. But again, I still think Survivor is better than most other reality shows. And Survivor 47, again, I thought was a very solid season, but not one that really reaches the high highs. And straight up, initially, I did actually have this lower on the list, where again, my initial placement was around the 7 to 8 mark. Yeah, I did bump it up a bit, just simply because, again, it is still Survivor. But again, I do think it's a season that really is lacking this like big defining feature about it. I feel like it's a season that just feels like competent in most aspects, a very consistent season, but one that doesn't really have this high. Though again, I think you can argue Operation Italy. Again, I think that was obviously a very good moment and a very good episode. And again, I really like the Shanbu episode as well. Yeah, I don't know if that's really enough to really carry the entire season. And again, I think when we're looking at the cast as a whole, I think it's a largely affable cast. Yeah, I do think it's a cast that's probably lacking in terms of big characters, where again, obviously you have Rome, though again, he's gone by the halfway point this season. Again, Andy has a really interesting arc. I would not say he's like necessarily the most like riveting TV character on his own right. And again, same thing goes with Rachel, or even then, again, a bit underwhelmed how Rachel ended up ultimately winning the game. But again, you have the likes of like Genevieve, Sam, Teeny, who all have, again, interesting content here and there. But again, I do think from a cast perspective, I do think this cast is, again, probably a little bit lacking in terms of personality from a lot of the more recent seasons. Though I also feel like this is probably one of the better casts gameplay wise. Again, I think we had a very fluid, dynamic game that was played. And again, that is at least interesting to where, again, I'm kind of like mixed on Survivor 47 as a whole. I think the season's just kind of average in most aspects, which again, I know most people don't agree with that. Most people think Survivor 47 is the best of the new era, which again, for me, it's literally right in the middle. But again, I still do think it is a competent season, which is enough to put it here at number 5. Now, number 4. We're moving on to a season that I'm surprised is this high in the sense that I really enjoyed the season when it was airing, though I did wonder how much it would hold the test of time. And again, still think it's good enough to be here number 4. And that season is Big Brother Canada Season 12. Sadly, probably the last BB Can season, at least for a while. But I thought BB Can 12 was a shockingly good season, especially after BB Can 11, which again was mixed. I thought had some high points, but definitely a lot of low. Again, I ended up ending that season being pretty low on the season as a whole. Yeah, season 12, I thought was a pretty solid season by the end. Now, I still think there are the same criticisms of the fact that obviously there's a lot less hype around the season. No one's really talking about the season after the fact. I think that's kind of underwhelming. But in terms of like how the season plays, especially as a television product, I thought it was a really fun show. Where again, we had a lot of really interesting personalities and a lot of really interesting gameplay. Again, obviously we got the return of Anthony and Victoria, who both have really interesting arcs across this season. Again, Anthony coming in second again is such a tragic downfall for him. But also we get, again, the fight between him and Spicy, which is probably one of the best fights possibly in Big Brother history. And beyond that, again, you have like the entire like machinations around the Kayla blindside, which is really interesting. You had Dennis blindside, only for Vivek to go out right after that. That was really interesting. And I think overall you had a really fun cast here. Now, again, the presentation of it, especially again without feeds, only digital dailies, especially the fact that also we didn't even consistently get digital dailies. Again, I think that definitely does harm the initial watching of the show, though I don't really feel like that would harm it as much on a rewatch, to where, again, the fact that the season ends with Bailey winning the season, again, who is this really bombastic character early on, yet she actually like plays a pretty solid game by the end. I think that's also a great aspect of the season, to where, again, I think as a whole, I do really like BB Can 12. Now, I would not be shocked if as time goes on, my opinion of my memory of it, again, starts to fade, and maybe Survivor 47 is a season I'll say is better years down the road. But at this current point, with it being relatively fresh in my mind, I do have BB Can 12 relatively high here at number 4. Now number 3, and we're moving back to the other Survivor US season from this year. We got Survivor 46, which ultimately obviously ends up making this the better of the Survivor US seasons this year for me, though I think the ranking is a little bit tough in the sense that obviously Survivor 46 is one that had a rough start. I thought the premiere was pretty good, but after that, I think the next 5 episodes were pretty rough. And the entire arc around Banu was just not particularly interesting to me. The Jem and Mariah boot rounds were just very foreshown, but I do think the season really picks up at the Split Tribal. I thought that episode was really great, and along with that we get Hide and Seek, which is probably still to this day my personal favorite episode of the new era. And then we follow that up with the Hunter blindside, which is really great, and then we follow that up with again the Liz meltdown, and after that, again, the season starts to peter out a bit. But again, I think that middle stretch of the season is very, very strong, and I think a lot of that comes down to not even necessarily like the gameplay of the season, where again, I think if we're ranking this on gameplay, I think 47 had more interesting gameplay, but I do think 46 is a lot more interesting from a character perspective. I think this season has some really insane characters on it. Q just alone, I think, is something that massively boons 46 over 47, and him debatably being my favorite character of the new era. And again, you also have Liz, and again, everything revolving around her meltdown was also really interesting to see. You had Venus, who I thought was a really fun presence on the season. You also had, again, some really humorous segments on the show. Again, the titular hide and seek moment was really fun. The moment at the Bermuda Triangle immunity challenge where they're trying to play the alphabet game. Again, all that was really fun as well. To where, again, I think this season just pops a bit more for me. To where, while I think this has lower lows than Survivor 47, I think it also has higher highs. Where while I do think overall as a season, the storytelling of the season's a bit of a mess, I do think the Kenzie win is one that is, again, just very oddly edited in the fact that it feels like a lot of it is just kind of a fabrication, and them trying to go so far out of the way to try to make Kenzie look like a better player than what she probably actually is. I do feel like it's still a spot where the ride to the end was still a lot of fun from my point of view, largely because of how many more fun character moments the season had, which again is for me enough to put it here at number 3. Now number 2, and again, I think these top 2 seasons here are truly elite seasons of reality television. I think this is a year that I'm surprised that we got these 2 seasons that are both, again, in the upper echelon of the shows they come from. Again, one a season of Big Brother, one a season of Survivor. At number 2 here, I am going to go with Big Brother 26, the Big Brother US season from the year, which was shockingly good. Where again, Big Brother's been on a pretty big slump, in my opinion, in recent years, where ever since BB20, which is the last top tier season in my mind, we've had again BB21, BB22, both pretty bad seasons. 23, again, I did not like as much as most people. And then 24 and 25 were just extremely mixed seasons. Yeah, 26 was finally a point where we finally got a truly great season. A season that, again, had some lacking gameplay for sure, especially outside of Chelsea, and even her game, again, have some qualms. But I do think it's a season that still provided for some really great TV. Again, we obviously had, again, insane characters from the likes of, again, Tucker. We had Angela, who probably one of the best reality TV characters of all time, where obviously she gives us the crazy eyes moment, which is still probably one of the most insane moments of the entire year. We also got some incredible blindsides. Again, the Cedric blindside is definitely amongst the best of all time. Again, Tucker going out in the way that he does was still so shocking to see. Joseph's blindside is still also pretty insane. And even at the tail end of the game, in a spot where we would typically just get nothing of intrigue, we still got some fun moments from, again, a lot of back and forth with Mackenzie debating on taking out Cam or not. We also had, again, just Mackenzie making some terrible moves in the end game stretch. Again, made for fun TV at least. So where, again, I think BB26 is, again, a truly elite season of Big Brother, in my top tier of Big Brother seasons. But again, there's somehow still a season better, and because that, BB26 ends up being here number 2. Now number 1, the best reality TV season of the year ends up being Australian Survivor, Titans versus Rebels, which, how are we in this world where Australian Survivor has provided my favorite reality TV season 2 years in a row? Now, again, to be fair, don't know if that sticks from last year. Again, if I were to redo that, I might have had Survivor 45 above Here's Villains, especially after I rewatched both those seasons in this last year. But still, Titans vs. Rebels, though, is one that I am in the process of rewatching at this current point, and I think it's still really good. I think Titans vs. Rebels is, again, a truly elite season of Survivor, in a spot where I think I would truly debate this as, again, one of the best seasons of all time. Again, in a world where, again, my top seasons of Survivor have always been the likes of Cagayan, Heroes vs. Villains, David vs. Goliath, Pearl Islands, I never thought another season would even hit that level, and I think Titans vs. Rebels does. Again, I think Titans vs. Rebels is in my top 5 seasons of Survivor globally, which is, again, so shocking to me. But again, it's largely because this is such a consistent season. Despite the fact that it's 24 episodes, again, still the typical bloated episode count and episode length that we get from Australian Survivor, despite that, the season is still really, really strong. Again, despite the fact that we get non-elimination episodes, those episodes don't end up really harming the overall product, but still interesting things happening during those episodes. Really, actually, probably the weakest episode of the entire season is the merge episode where Scott ends up quitting the game. Though even then, that's the merge episodes. There's still like interesting dynamics going on. And again, beyond that, you have like, again, the Ferris-Kirby feud. Again, both Ferris and Kirby, their own rights, end up being like really interesting characters. You get some really incredible moments. Again, the almost rock draw when Eden goes home is still an insane tribal. You have some insane tribals at the swap where, again, Sarah goes home after Mark tries to flip on the middle-aged mafia. You have the Garrick blindside, which was also really fun. You have also at the beginning of the season, the, again, big physical threats that would typically run Australian Survivor season being on the bottom from the offset, and us having these like more underdog style figures taking control of both tribes, which was interesting to see as well. To where I think this season has pretty much everything you would want from it. Again, incredible characters, really great gameplay, and somehow being still a consistent season. I can really only say that for those other 4 seasons I mentioned, where even something like Survivor Micronesia, again, a season that I think most people agree is one of the best seasons of all time. I think this is better. Micronesia in itself has a really slow stretch at points in the pre-merge. This season doesn't really have that. It's really a consistent season through and through, despite being so long, which is so shocking to see. And again, I still can't believe we're in a world where Australian Survivor, one of the best seasons of all time, in a spot where, again, I used to hate Australian Survivor. And again, I still think aspects of its format is flawed, but Titans vs. Rebels is a season that's really able to excel beyond that. It makes me really excited to see what we get with the franchise next year, which, again, we're getting a lot of hype about those seasons. So again, we'll see how those go. But obviously, with all that said, Titans vs. Rebels ends up being here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that's my ranking of every reality show from the year of 2024. Now, again, I guess it's time for a bit of a channel update, kind of. Again, I've done this every other year, and sure, again, I don't think there's as much importance being put on this one as the previous years, where in this last year, I've started a $5 membership tier, where, again, you can watch videos whenever they finish. Though also another perk to that, initially at least, was in a monthly channel update, again, essentially running down what I worked on the last month, what is coming up the next month, and what I'm working on for down the road. And again, later in the year, I essentially just decided to make those public, to where, again, essentially, if you want to know what I'm doing from the month to month, again, you can just see those channel updates. So again, obviously, because of that, again, it makes this one like kind of less important, but again, still some things to talk about. Again, I am obviously reaching my 6th year of doing this channel, which is mind-blowing, and again, I'd like to thank everybody who's still along for the ride. Also would like to thank all the people that have joined the membership tier, where, again, I started this earlier this year, not really expecting many people to join, though I got a surprising amount of support there. But again, I'd like to thank everybody that has supported me through that. But again, in terms of like actual updates for the channel, there's not really that much to update. I essentially just plan on doing the same. Again, I'm still planning on continuing covering the same shows: Survivor, Big Brother, The Amazing Race, as of right now, The Challenge. Again, still going to cover The Traitors, though obviously we are leading up to the filming of Survivor 50, in a spot where, again, I do intend on still doing some Survivor 50 coverage. Again, I'll be doing cast speculation. Obviously, I'll react to the cast once it comes out. I'm sure I'll do updates for any information that we hear about it along the way. And also, again, I'm still keeping the retrospectives. Again, Survivor Palau, Guatemala will be released over the course of next year. Again, BB Can 3, BB6. Again, I'm still doing all these things. Again, I'm largely just continuing on with what I've already been doing. Though, again, like every other year, I do usually try to do a bigger ranking at the beginning of the year. And again, this one will be a bit later, towards the end of January. But I will be doing a second boot ranking for Survivor. I don't know. Do people care about that? Maybe. But also, I will be updating my runner-up ranking for my 6-year anniversary video, because it was my 1-year anniversary video, and now it's 5 years later. And along with that, again, I'll also be updating certain other videos I did 5 years ago and keeping in line with what I did this year. And again, these last couple years, I've also done a ranking of every player from a specific show. I did BB Can last year. This year I did BBUS. Next year, I do plan on doing Australian Survivor. Now, I will say I'm not entirely sure when it's going to be coming out, considering I am going to be waiting for at least Brains vs. Brawn, more than likely AU vs. the World as well, to conclude before making that video. So again, it'll come out at some point across the next year, but again, stay tuned for that. And again, maybe I'll have an even bigger ranking for the following year. But again, really just in general, just expect more of the same. I'm not really planning on changing much. I'm essentially just doing this same solid content. Again, if you want to hear me talk about things I don't necessarily do videos on, again, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheBrainReview. Or again, I stream twice a week on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern time. So you can catch me there. And really just expect more of the same content, as I really don't expect to really change much over the course of this next year. Now, 2026, we'll see. But again, for 2025, again, things should be pretty by the numbers by the end of it. So again, with that, man, that's pretty much all I gotta say about the year of 2024. And again, see you next year for the same style of content. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.